3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
All right, welcome to Roots of Reality. I'm your host, Ben Baumann, and today I'm going to be talking about 1990s nostalgia. This is an era that I know fairly well since I was actually born into it, but it's also an era where I think a lot of people will have a lot of memories. It's obviously probably one of the most important eras that we've seen in a long time because of the kind of birth of the internet, which would greatly shape the world around us for the foreseeable decades. And so now, just diving in, the 1990s were an era of technological revolution. As mentioned, it was the era of the internet, but also the era of the CD and DVDs, personal computers, now filling up households across America. And everyone's starting to get email accounts on AOL.com or Yahoo.com. Then there was like Instant Messenger with AIM, where people thought that was really cool that you could just message someone back and forth via Instant Messenger, which now is kind of laughable in terms of how much technology has advanced since then. You also had online shopping really start to come about with Amazon and eBay, which remain pretty big operations still to this very day. And you also had the origins of the search engine known as Google, which I think everyone uses regularly still. But we also had other different innovations, like the digital camera, which became a staple on people's vacations and when documenting birthday celebrations for families around the globe. We also now had cell phones come out, which would eventually replace the previously widespread use of home phones with a cord attached to the wall. And when watching our favorite movies, we had VHS tapes before it would then be replaced by DVD players. Next, this era was also a huge development for the world of video games. Some kids, for example, had a Super Nintendo or a Sega Genesis. For example, some people were playing like Street Fighter II or Super Mario or Ninja Turtles on those consoles. And later on, as those consoles become phased out, you would have Nintendo 64 and PlayStation and Dreamcast. Thus, games like Pokemon Stadium and Mario Kart on the 64 were popular, or Metal Gear Solid, Spider-Man, Tarzan, Tony Hawk skateboarding game, Spyro the Dragon, Tomb Raider, and Medal of Honor would become popular on the PlayStation, along with the various sports games like Madden and your NBA, NHL, MLB, and FIFA games. Then on the Dreamcast, though not nearly as popular as the PlayStation, you did have some interesting games that you didn't have anywhere else, like Power Stone, for example, for those who may remember that. But we also had this development of the Game Boy Color. And with that, the legendary Pokemon games, when they came in like red, blue, and yellow, and were just gigantic hits. It was hard to find a kid that did not have a Game Boy Color in those days. On the computer, though, you had games like Command & Conquer and Warcraft become quite popular. And they just had kind of other, kid-like gadgets like Gigapets, where you could have this little virtual pet on a keychain. Kids would show up to school with them on their backpacks or something. And so, yeah, lots of entertainment going on in the 1990s. As for television, kid shows like Rugrats, The Wild Thornberrys, SpongeBob SquarePants, Dexter's Laboratory, Powerpuff Girls, Ed, Edd and Eddy, Courage the Cowardly Dog, Digimon, Tailspin, Power Rangers, Beetleborgs, and Pokemon, along with Hey Arnold and Johnny Bravo were staples in a lot of households across America with kids. Meanwhile, teenagers also enjoyed shows like The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, That 70s Show, Sabrina the Teenage Witch, Boy Meets World, and you also had adult sitcoms like Seinfeld, Everybody Loves Raymond, Roseanne, Home Improvement, King of Queens, And then, of course, you had Star Trek: The Next Generation and X-Files on the sci-fi side of things. Another major show, though, was Mr. Bean, a comedy show really not quite like any other to exist. Basically, there's no words being spoken in that entire series, but just Mr. Bean's antics. So it's a very easy to understand comedy that would really reach global fame because it was just understandable for anyone regardless of language. The 90s were also an era, though, where you had a lot of these kind of adultish cartoons popping up, like The Simpsons, South Park, and Family Guy would all become popular. You had the game show Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? That became quite popular. In terms of films, there was the film Lion King, Toy Story, Small Soldiers, Mighty Ducks, Jurassic Park for kids. You also had Men in Black, Casper, Stuart Little, Space Jam, Ants, A Bug's Life, Tarzan, Hercules, Mulan, A Night Before Christmas. Then for adults, you had films like Titanic, Braveheart, Forrest Gump, Schindler's List, The Sixth Sense, Saving Private Ryan, Independence Day, Armageddon, Twister, The Matrix, Mission Impossible. And then, of course, you had these major family-friendly hits as well, like Star Wars Episode 1, Home Alone, Mrs. Doubtfire, and The Mummy. And the music of this era was dominated by rock music, much like the 80s and 70s, though you started to have this kind of blend of different types of rock genre with grunge, punk rock, and alternative rock, along with kind of heavier bands as well. But you would get like Nirvana, Green Day, Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains, Soundgarden, Stone Temple Pilots, Weezer, Blink-182, The Offspring, REM, Creed, Gin Blossoms, Third Eye Blind, Smashing Pumpkins, Everclear, Bush, Smash Mouth, Dishwalla, Fastball, No Doubt, Sublime, Sugar Ray, Nine Inch Nails, Godsmack, Korn, Slipknot, Limp Bizkit, Oasis, and Bare Naked Ladies, just to name a few. You also had the rise of like boy bands like the Backstreet Boys and NSYNC, as well as an all-girls group known as the Spice Girls, which became super popular. In fact, some of my earliest concerts and memories as a kid growing up in the 90s was going with my older sister and mom to a Backstreet Boys and Spice Girls concert, which is something that a lot of people probably cannot say to have seen both of those, especially because I was really young at the time. In terms of country music, would start to become a little bit more mainstream with figures like Garth Brooks, Shania Twain, and Brooks and Dunn. You also had these kind of just solo female singers who weren't really like pop singers so much, but just kind of wrote these really nice melodies and good songs that a lot of people enjoyed, like Sarah McLachlan, Alanis Morissette, and Ditto. And then, of course, you did have the pop stars like every other decade has. In the 90s, you had Mariah Carey, Whitney Houston, Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, and Celine Dion. We also had a very early version of kind of the techno music space with DJs. Probably one of the most famous ones in the 90s being Fatboy Slim. Rap music did start to emerge in popularity with people like Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, and Tupac. Also the early days of Eminem as well, who would play and continues to play a major figure in the rap genre. We also had books, though, that were humongous hits with kids, like Harry Potter by J.K. Rowling and Goosebumps by R.L. Stine. There were kids across America reading those books, and Harry Potter is the one that has really stood the test of time, with each generation becoming Harry Potter fans. It's become a lot like Star Wars, in fact, in terms of popularity across generations. And finally, in the world of sports, in basketball, it was a world controlled by the greatest basketball player of all time, Michael Jordan, with the Chicago Bulls. They would win 3 straight titles twice, winning 6 in total. In the NHL, the Hockey League, you would have The Penguins, led by Mario Lemieux, who would win back-to-back titles, as well as the Red Wings, led by Steve Yzerman, who would win back-to-back also. In terms of professional baseball, the Yankees would win 3 World Series titles, led by Derek Jeter. In the world of soccer, this was an era that was dominated in terms of popularity by Manchester United, who would win the Champions League once, but also have the famous soccer player David Beckham in this era. And, when it came to Manchester United, they were the team that you'd pretty much see kids across America and all over the world wearing Manchester United jerseys, because that was just the team. That seemed to be the world's team at the time in terms of popularity. And finally, when it came to NFL and American football, the Dallas Cowboys would win 3 Super Bowls in this era, led by Troy Aikman, which is why they would become known as kind of America's team in the 90s, though since have really faded in terms of popularity, since they have not been nearly as good since. So with that, the 1990s were a decade where you would see a lot of interesting things develop. Most importantly, as mentioned previously, the internet, which really changes things quite a bit when I do get to the 2000s decade, and of course, later decades going on. So a very important decade with lots of great culture, sports, music, books, technology, video games really replacing, kids playing with traditional toys. And so it is a major decade that people who live through it will remember the rest of their lives, and certainly has continued influence on the generations growing up today. So with that, as always, remember, billions of years led to you, so make the most of it.